the login procedure.
David, I hope this is okay to record.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that.
Sure. I had some folks say they couldn't necessarily be here, but they might want to see the recording afterwards. So
Great.
Sure.
David, with that, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
Wonderful. I'll give a brief intro and then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
Well, hello and welcome everyone again from the HSCI Hindu Chaplaincy Resource Center Speaker Series for August 2nd, 2024, with special guest Rev David Fleenor. My name is Zachary Ginder, and I, along with my esteemed colleagues, will be helping to facilitate the conversation today. I'd also like to express an especially warm welcome to anyone joining us for the first time. I see some new faces here today, and those from interfaith or other diverse backgrounds. Welcome. I'd also like to introduce the Dean of the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute, Gaurav Rastogi-ji, to provide a brief welcome. Gaurav-ji?
Thank you, Zachary G. And once again, I want to thank Reverend David for coming here and offering to talk to us. We really appreciate your presence here. For everybody else, welcome again to this conversation. The Hindu Spiritual Care Institute is in the business of teaching spiritual care and chaplaincy. We started in California. We now run an online cohort, and we are graduating our 6th cohort. Now, I'll paste the link here. You're welcome to join us on August 30th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific and meet the amazing people around the world that have participated in this path toward chaplaincy. And with that, Zachary G, I turn it back to you. Thank you again and welcome to this conversation.
Thank you, Gaurav-ji. To provide additional context, under the umbrella of the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute, the Hindu Chaplaincy Resource Center is dedicated to providing reliable and authenticated information to support interreligious spiritual care. Through that, we strive to promote education, training, and effective utilization of spiritual care resources, making them accessible not only to our members, but also interested individuals from other traditions. So ideally, we aim to be a trusted center of knowledge and support for offering compassionate care that transcends spiritual, personal belief, and religious boundaries worldwide. We also have a journal called Kutumba. All registrants for the event today will be receiving a copy by email of our latest edition, which also doubles as a graduation booklet that includes bios of our graduating class and select articles and shared experiences from the field. Along those same lines, I'd also like to highlight a special invitation and call for submissions to the journal for individuals from diverse paths. We encourage you to share your insight, personal experience, and expertise with our global community through the Kutumba Journal. Everyone is welcome to submit, and I will happy to be sharing out the contact information for that in a follow-up email. It is now my absolute pleasure to welcome our special guest, Rev David Fleenor, a distinguished spiritual care educator, researcher, and consultant. As a board-certified chaplain and ACPE certified educator, David is the president of Fleenor Consulting, LLC, specializing in providing evidence-based spiritual care and education to healthcare organizations. Rev David is the founding manager of ACPE accredited clinical pastoral education CPE program at Stony Brook University Hospital in Long Island, New York, and an instructor at its Renaissance School of Medicine, where he teaches spirituality and health. He previously directed CPE programs at Mount Sinai Health System in New York City. Currently, David is writing his dissertation for a PhD in health sciences at Rush University under the mentorship of Dr. George Flechette, a pioneer in chaplaincy research. His dedication to promoting evidence-based multi-faith spiritual care has earned him prestigious grants and numerous peer-reviewed publications. As an Episcopal priest, David serves at the Church of the Ascension in Brooklyn, New York, and lives in Queens with his wife and stepdaughter. Please join me in welcoming Rev David Fleenor. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real joy. It's a real pleasure to be here. I really am grateful to have this opportunity. And really grateful to share with you the information that I'm going to share. For me, it's this evening. I'm so tempted. I know we have an audience in various time zones, so I'll try to limit my references to the time of day, but really grateful to be here and looking forward to it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started to talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about, transforming chaplaincy education. And the subtitle here is, what do healthcare chaplains really need to know? If you'd like to use the QR code, you can access this slide deck and keep it for later or follow through. I need to first thank the ACPE Foundation for supporting this project with the 2023 ACP Innovation and Research Grant, which has funded it. So I found this really interesting quote by Arthur Schopenhauer that says, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as self-evident. You know, and I resonate with that in very small, intimate, personal ways and large, global, you know, systemic ways. And I put that quote here because I've given this presentation a couple of times, once at the ACPE conference this summer and once at the Association of Professional Chaplains conference this summer. And I know that some of the things that I'm presenting, what I said to that group there is, I'll be delighted if you throw some chairs and you violently oppose what I have to say, just because I want to be somewhat provocative in a spirit of playfulness, you know, not combativeness, to test out some ideas and to share some data that we haven't seen before that I hope will be illuminated. So let's start with the context. So this guy on the right side of the screen is Dr. George Fichette. He is the pioneering figure in chaplaincy research. He's my dissertation mentor at Rush University, and he and I have worked intimately on this data that I'm going to share with you today. There's a couple of problems in the education of healthcare chaplains. And before we even get to this slide, let me say, for those of you who may not know, traditionally, healthcare chaplains in the US have had to meet a number of requirements, and they are earn a graduate degree of 72 graduate hours. Now, that's evolved quite a bit in the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be a graduate degree of 72 theological graduate hours. And basically, it's the Master of Divinity degree that's offered largely in Protestant Christian seminaries. Another one of those is clinical pastoral education, 4 units of CPE. Then you have denominational endorsement. Sometimes that includes ordination, and then 2,000 hours of practice, so on and so forth, to become a board certified chaplain. Now, I don't know if you recognize this or not, but all of that comes out of a Protestant Christian context and paradigm. And that worked for a time, because that was really the seedbed from which healthcare chaplaincy in the US grew from its founding 100 years ago. I think this year or next year is the 100th anniversary of clinical pastoral education. And what we've seen since 1988 is a staggering growth in the number of theological schools offering chaplaincy training. You can see this based on this article here. But here's one of the problems. Chaplaincy-focused degrees and concentrations are on the rise, but there's no consensus among chaplaincy educators, either academic, and I mean that as theological educators, the people who are teaching largely in Christian seminaries, and the clinical educators like myself, clinical pastoral educators, largely who teach in hospitals and academic medical centers across the US. There's no consensus among us about what aspiring healthcare chaplains really need to learn. Theological educators and clinical pastoral educators, we just don't collaborate, and that contributes to an unspecific, and by that I mean a non-standard curriculum for aspiring healthcare chaplains and an uncoordinated educational process for aspiring healthcare chaplains. So I set out for my dissertation research to establish curriculum standards in both academic and clinical settings for the training of healthcare chaplains. I feel like we need something that unifies us so that we can train. We don't want to train chaplain robots, but we want to have some sort of agreed upon standards that guide the training, which is what every other discipline does. So the project has 3 studies. The first one is the one I'm going to present data from today. And the research question that guides that study is, what do early career healthcare chaplains view as gaps in their chaplaincy education? I've also interviewed healthcare chaplaincy hiring managers, and I asked them, what knowledge, skills, and attitudes do you want entry-level generalist healthcare chaplains to possess or demonstrate? And I'm currently collecting data from a variety of healthcare chaplaincy experts about what curriculum standards they believe should guide chaplaincy education. So the goal of the project is to identify the core curriculum components that are crucial to the education of healthcare chaplains, with the ultimate outcome of improving spiritual care and healthcare. Now, keep in mind that I'm aware, as you are, that chaplaincy takes place in a variety of contexts. I'm focused only on healthcare for my research and for this presentation. So let's get into the content. So the research participants for that first study that I mentioned were 288 early career healthcare chaplains who took a survey from February 14th, 2023 to March 30th. And by early career, we meant people who have worked in healthcare chaplaincy for 2 to 5 years, somewhere between 20 to 40 hours per week. Our research participants, this was the profile. Basically, a 46-year-old white Protestant Christian. We had about a 50-50 split between men and women. 71% of our participants had earned a Master of Divinity. 30% of those had a chaplaincy concentration and 4 or 5 units of ACPE, accredited CPE. As you may know, there are a number of accrediting bodies for CPE. ACPE is the largest and the longest standing one. These research participants were mostly board certified, 53%, and of those who were board certified, 80% were certified with the Association of Professional Chaplains, the largest certifier of chaplains. Now, here's the big story. I asked them to what degree do you agree or disagree with this statement? My clinical pastoral education prepared me well to function as a healthcare chaplain. 85% agreed or strongly agreed that that was true. But only 40% agreed or strongly agreed that their degree had prepared them well to function as a healthcare chaplain. And that was exactly what I expected when I set out to study this. I've worked in academic medical centers, overseeing clinical pastoral education programs for a decade now. And what I've found over that decade with CPE residents is a few things. One is I can never assume a baseline of knowledge when my new residents show up for the first day. There are some who've never had a course on chaplaincy, spiritual care, or pastoral care, and there are some who have a whole degree focused on it. It really doesn't matter what seminary they went to or what the name of their degree was. They are really all over the map. And the net result of that was clinical pastoral education, which is really focused on putting people into the practice of spiritual care, doing it, and then reflecting on it. What I had to do was carve out a lot more time for didactic content. And by that, I mean academic content. So I found that I had to remediate a lot of the students, which meant that they weren't able to maximize the opportunity for clinical education. And that is one of the ways that that gap manifests itself between, or the lack of coordination between the academic and the clinical educators. So if we drill down a bit, we took at that time, there were 31 competencies for board certification by the APC. There are now 29. And we boiled them down to these 9 areas. I didn't want people to have to rate 31. And we asked them the question, to what extent did your graduate degree and CPE, and then these 9 areas, prepare you to practice spiritual care? And the way that this table is laid out is it starts with the highest percentage of agreement at the top for CPE and works its way down. And 7 out of the 9, people rated their clinical pastoral education higher than their degree. There were only 2 areas where they rated their degree higher than CPE. So let me just point to the first 2 right now, because as it turns out, what CPE does well, and I'll show you this in the qualitative data soon, is prepare people to practice spiritual care and to be self-aware practitioners. That's really what CPE does and really does well. But it also helps students to develop their theologies or philosophies or spiritual care, to use spiritual assessments, basically take an outcomes-oriented approach to spiritual care, to teach. They learned a lot about groups and organizations, the behavioral sciences, and ethics. Now, research literacy is one of those areas where they said their degree did better than their CPE. And that may very well be. You can see it's just a 2 percentage point difference. George and I tend to think that we weren't specific enough and that most people answered this question thinking of humanities research instead of scientific research. And that's what we meant. We meant, are you able to pick up a journal, a peer-reviewed journal, find articles that you're looking for using, common search tools, read the article, understand it, critique it, and decide if the information contained therein is worthy of changing your practice. That's what we meant. So the jury is out on research literacy. We've been working really hard over the last 15 years to increase research literacy in the field of healthcare chaplaincy. And then the final one, the one on performing public ceremonies and services in diverse settings, makes a lot of sense because that's what Christian seminaries really do well with. They teach you how to preach, they teach you how to lead worship, they teach you, liturgy courses and that sort of thing, which is not something that happens in CPE. So as we look at the results for CPE, we found basically that there was a pattern of themes. This is in the qualitative data that people understood that there was an approach to CPE called the clinical method of learning. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, we informally define it as a process of action, reflection, and new or revised action. Meaning you go and you visit a patient, that's the action. What I like to tell my students is I hope that you're going to have a head scratcher, that you're going to walk out of that room and you're going to say, I'm not exactly sure if that went well, or that really raises a lot of questions for me. And then begin to reflect on that using the methods, which we'll go over in a moment, and then go back out into the clinic or out into the hospital and try it again and try to do it better. And it's this cycle that we go through again and again and again. People understood that. That's the clinical method of learning. What they said, these early career healthcare chaplains said, is that they understood the methods, and that these methods, the verbatims, which are case studies that we do in CPE, individual supervision, process groups, which are often called interpersonal relations group, IPR, and the mentoring by staff chaplains were really important to them. And then finally, the outcomes. I've already mentioned it. They were the top two in the quantitative data, helping them to be more self-aware and to learn practical skills for chaplaincy. So I want to start with the approach, the clinical method of learning, and give you some sample quotes. I mean, this one right here, this quote is really representative of what people said about the clinical method of learning. This model of education helped me to provide care, think about what happened and what could have been different, and then try again. Trial and error helped shape the chaplain I am today. This person really gets it. That's what CPE is all about. And then we look at the methods, and people said things like, so the positive ones are in the yellow, and the not so positive, which are equally true, are in the red. Verbatim presentations opened up a great deal of self-awareness for me and allowed me to explore other students' self-awareness in a learning environment. So that's focused on self-awareness. The red is going to be focused on the skill set, but also you can see a little bit of critique back and forth. Hearing other presentations from other residents didn't usually add to my skill set or ability to be an effective chaplain. So you tend to see students kind of break out into these two areas. Some are really interested in greater self-awareness. Some are really interested in their skill in developing their practical skills. Regarding individual supervision, some folks said supervision pushed me to greater self-understanding and further self-healing. And then you see in the red, individual supervision that turns into therapy is not healthy. The focus on introspection and work relationships often distracted from learning and the practical skills of chaplaincy. With the process group, you see the same pattern, a focus on increasing self-awareness and then a critique. IPR did not benefit my care for patients in any way. That's what some folks were really focused on. Now, this one was not one that we expected. There's not been a lot of research on the roles that staff chaplain plays to mentor CPE students. And a lot of it happens in a very informal sort of way. One participant said, mentoring individual instruction on patient visits, the feedback provided me the confidence to visit any patient. And then others said, I didn't have a lot of examples of good care from seasoned chaplains. And I think implied in that is that they would have liked to. And then finally, the outcomes. I believe the strengths of chaplaincy resides in the self-awareness of the chaplain, and then the focus on introspection and work relationships often distracted from learning practical chaplaincy skills. So you see that tension between those two pieces. So about the degree, we asked what worked and what didn't work. The major theme that we developed here was relevance and irrelevance to the practice of healthcare chaplaincy. Largely, folks talked about what was irrelevant. And this is a good representative quote. Somebody said, I completed an MDiv, so there are a lot of classes in there that aren't necessarily relevant. Also received my education from a Christian seminary. That education is important for formation, but not always relevant specifically for spiritual care work. That's representative because what we found in the qualitative data is that the overarching theme is irrelevance, and it breaks out into these two subcategories. What they're saying is that I was trained to function in a particular context, largely, which is Christian congregations. And that's not what I ended up doing in hospitals. And then the content, I learned a lot of largely Christian theology, but it wasn't all Christian participants. We did have a vocal Buddhist participant who echoed sort of the same ideas about focusing on, I'm sorry, my smart speaker just went off when I said a certain word. Excuse me. So what they were saying is that the content of their coursework wasn't as relevant for the context that they ended up in and for the role that they ended up in. Let me give you some examples. Most of my graduate degree focused on parish ministry or congregational ministry, which is significantly different from healthcare chaplaincy. In terms of the content, someone said, these classes are great for a pastor in a church, but not very useful in a trauma setting like I'm in. So that gives you a sense for what people said. When we asked them what did not work well, 3 areas really rose to the top. Biblical languages, church history, and homiletics. You can see the quote over here. While biblical languages may be personally beneficial, they're specific to translating and exegeting biblical texts. This is not necessary to do the work of healthcare chaplaincy. With church history, knowing the history of Christianity doesn't come up often in my work. And then for homiletics, which is preaching, it's helpful for public speaking and being comfortable putting together religious services for the hospital, but it's not a practical class for a chaplain. When we get into what did work well, it seems obvious: pastoral care and counseling courses, because they're relevant, ethics courses, cultural diversity, and world religion. So about pastoral care, one said, it's what I do. So that course was useful in preparing me in the work. Someone said about ethics, healthcare chaplains are regularly asked to sit on committees and advise patients or families with complex decisions. And then finally, I'm more aware of differences and more understanding, with a greater appreciation for beliefs that are different from my own, thanks to education on cultural and religious diversity. It's interesting because in both of my studies, the one with healthcare chaplaincy hiring managers and this one with early career healthcare chaplains, that phrase, different from my own, comes up quite a bit. And it's a colloquial way of referring to cultural diversity, religious and spiritual diversity. A lot of healthcare chaplaincy education, especially the degree, is designed to help us understand our own religious and spiritual traditions, which is really helpful. Most of us practice in settings where we're working with people who are largely different from us. They don't share our religious, cultural, and spiritual traditions. And so this phrase, different from my own, keeps coming up. We asked them, what do you wish you had learned? And this representative quote says, I wish I'd learned more about the medical side of healthcare. Turns out that healthcare chaplains in their academic degrees don't learn much, if anything, about healthcare, the context in which they will work. And we asked them, someone else said healthcare specific classes to provide an intro into the hospital, including hospital policy, reporting structures, areas of medicine, who's who in the hospital, what's the role of the social worker, et cetera. So these early career healthcare chaplains who've been practicing for 2 to 5 years really had wished that they had learned more about healthcare. They had to learn it on the job, which is not the worst thing ever, but it could have been, they could have been prepared a bit more. We asked them about the learning experiences that they wish they'd had, and these three emerged. Shadowing, they wish they had had more opportunities to shadow chaplains earlier. Simulated learning, that they could go into a lab with mock visits and practice their skills and increase their confidence. And internships, again, the ability to see and experience what this work is really all about. I'm going to skip over the Healthcare Chaplaincy hiring manager information just in the interest of time. So onto the conversation with other key leaders and some of the literature in the field. I don't know if you all know who this is, but this is Wendy Cadge, who is a sociologist who's been incredibly influential in our field, not a chaplain herself. Just this summer began a new role. She used to be at Brandeis. Now she's at Bryn Mawr College as the new college president. But she's done a lot for our field, and I think she'll continue to do that. In 2012, at the APC annual conference, she gave a talk and she said this: I don't think tweaking or revising the standards will work this time. And I want to encourage you to think about how you would design an educational program for chaplains if you were doing so from scratch. I'll be surprised if you come up with the model you have now. And that's one of those things that an outsider comes and says, and it makes you want to, makes some people want to throw chairs. It makes other people want to stand up and cheer. And I find it a very inspiring thing to say. And it's really driven the work that I'm doing in terms of research and efforts to reform the field. There's one other person who has I think a worthwhile quote for us to consider, the Reverend Kevin Massey. In a 2014 article that he published, he said, a needed shift of identity involves seeing a chaplain primarily as a healthcare professional with theological and religious training rather than as a theological or religious professional with a healthcare role. That is a very interesting and I find inspiring statement that challenges us to reconsider the paradigm. And this is the paradigm, as far as I see it. Healthcare chaplains occupy a hybrid role, simultaneously as spiritual leaders and healthcare professionals. Now, traditionally, to train and shape healthcare chaplains, our field has taken the approach to come from the spiritual leader bubble, if you will, by requiring that we have religious training, again, largely Protestant Christian from a seminary perspective. But I want to suggest that there might be a second way to do this. And that is to take a health sciences approach. That is to say, to come at this hybrid role from the healthcare professional bubble. And there is only one program in the country that does that, academically speaking, and that's Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. For years, they've had a Master's of Science degree in what they call patient counseling, which is basically healthcare chaplaincy, but that's the term that they use. It's a state hospital, and for a variety of reasons, they have to use that term. Marilyn Barnes is the director, the chair of that program, and we've been in conversation as of late. Her and her colleagues have done some incredible work to reshape this degree, and they're doing some really interesting things. I mean, really trailblazing. First of all, to have a non-religious university to offer this degree, because they really see that hybrid role, and they're taking the approach of we can train people coming from that healthcare science side of things. You see that on the right. The question that always emerges is, but what about formation? Formation is this idea that we are formed and shaped through our, and again, I'm going to speak from a Protestant Christian point of view, from our theological education in seminaries, through our ordination processes, through our CPE, to be a certain kind of instrument, a certain kind of professional. And I value that. And I went through that, and I think it's been invaluable to me as a healthcare chaplain and a lot of my colleagues. So whenever I have this conversation, people will say, well, what about formation? You're talking about knowledge and skills. as if it's just, you know, some sort of technical sort of thing, but people need to be formed. And I agree. And in other healthcare professions, there's already a conversation. They call it professional identity formation. You can find that literature in medical education. And so I think that just because we've done it a certain way over our history doesn't mean that there is not another way or other ways to do it. I think where we can agree is that we have a shared outcome, a shared goal in mind, and that is that we form and shape the person. We form and shape the professional and that identity, along with teach the skills and the knowledge. But that's a study for somebody else, not for me. I've got enough on my plate at this point, but I think it would be very interesting to look into how chaplains understand their formation processes and what worked, what didn't work, and some other ways that we might be able to do it. So we get to the question, how to transform healthcare chaplaincy education. Well, the 100+ seminaries with degrees or concentrations for chaplains, I think, should update their curricula or create new curricula that is healthcare specific. Most of, if not all of the degrees offered by 100+ seminaries in the US focus on chaplaincy broadly. And I understand that. Economics drive this in part. As Protestant Christianity declines in the US, fewer people go to seminary, and seminaries want to stay alive and vibrant. And so they come up with new degrees. And as one of my dissertation advisors has said, she said, you know, I designed this chaplaincy degree with the idea that broader would be better, because then people could graduate and then they would have more choice. Maybe they want to go into corrections chaplaincy. Maybe they want to go into healthcare chaplaincy. Maybe it's military chaplaincy. Who knows? And I think that's a valid point. My argument is that healthcare chaplaincy is the largest sector of chaplaincy in the US and maybe the most developed. I think military chaplaincy is second to that. And that at this point, there's a distinct body of knowledge and set of practices for healthcare chaplains that merit its own degree. On the other side, I think School of Health Sciences or health professionals, whatever you want to call it, and the like, should create new graduate degrees specifically for healthcare chaplains. Before people run off and do that, like VCU has done, I think that feasibility study would be in order. I'm at Stony Brook University Hospital, a state university out on Long Island in New York. And I have a dream of proposing a new degree like this, and I've already looked into what it takes. And the very first thing is a feasibility study. And basically the question is anybody going to come and pay to do this? I don't know. It's a great question. I haven't done the feasibility study. I hope somebody will do that, not just for my specific area, but let's begin maybe nationally, internationally, and see if there's actually a market for that. So I believe we need curriculum standards to guide the development or redevelopment of graduate degrees in healthcare chaplaincy. And I think that we can look at some parallel organizations. We don't have an accrediting body. All of the schools that offer chaplaincy degrees in theological seminaries are accredited by the Association of Theological Schools, the ATS. I don't think I'm not sure. They may not be the right group. I'm not sure that they are the right group for new degrees or degrees focused specifically on healthcare chaplaincy. Some might say the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, the ACPE, might be the right institution, and maybe, but they're really focused on clinical education, not on academic education. So it may be that some enterprising person needs to develop a new accrediting body. Maybe it's the Association of Professional Chaplains, I don't know. But what would it look like? Well, maybe something like the Council on Social Work Education, which has developed curriculum standards and holds schools of social work accountable to those standards, similar to KCREP, which is an accrediting body for counseling degrees. Now, another issue is that the current arrangement is that we have a sequential model similar to graduate medical education. In graduate medical education, you go to medical school for 4 years, and then you go into your residency and fellowships and that sort of thing. We do a similar thing. We go get our academic degree, and then we go into clinical pastoral education. Other health professions like physical therapy, for example, have an integrated clinical model where the CPE or the clinical education is embedded within the academic degree. And so you have less lag time between learning concepts and theories and putting them into practice, or at least seeing them put into practice. I think there's a lot of merit to that approach. Right now, to be APC board certified chaplain, they don't like double dipping. And by that, I mean, they don't like you to get credit both for clinical pastoral education and academic credit. So when I did CPE, when I was in seminary 25 years ago, I think I got 9 credit hours for 1 unit of CPE. And I think the APC used to only allow you to do that once. And so that's what leads me into this statement here. We need chaplaincy certifying bodies, chiefly the Association of Professional Chaplains, the largest, probably most influential, to embrace innovation and flexibility to enable pilot programs to test different educational approaches. I would really like to see this happen. I was talking to a key leader in the APC earlier this week about this very thing, and I feel like there's some openness to that. One of the ways we thought about it was to say, I said, the APC is not a speedboat that can turn on a dime. It's a cargo ship. It's very large, and as innovative and flexible as it would want to be, it's still a very, very big ship that can't turn very fast. And so, we have some structural limitations here, but hopefully we have some openness to that. So that's that. Feel free to use the QR code to access the slide deck, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions or ideas. And I believe we still have some time. Yeah, we still have about 15 minutes or so for some conversation here. So I will stop sharing and see if there are any questions, comments, ideas. I'm happy to talk about it. Yes, Lucia.
So this is not a question, more like I'm thinking it aloud. Like formation, emphasizing formation in chaplaincy seems counterintuitive to me, because when you come formed in a certain way, and then especially in the hospital setting, right? I think you would have to restart. You'd have to rebuild yourself, is how I would look at it. If you can expand on that, why they would require.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. So traditionally, because we've come out of the Protestant Christian tradition, that's been just part of it, I think, even assumed. And CPE really focuses on, as you can see in the data there, self-awareness, but also reflection on one's identity. And we're even doubling down more on that as we have recognized and have embraced the importance of embracing diversity, multiculturalism, and multi-religious population and that sort of thing, because it helps us to know where we are so that we can be open to others who are different from us. So, it's complicated. We have a mechanism within for board certified chaplains called endorsement by a recognized religious body. Typically it's a denomination, if you will. And I think in a lot of ways we've outsourced the formation or the certification of formation to the denominations, because we've said, well, I'm an Episcopalian, I'm in the Anglican Christian or Protestant Christian tradition. I can't tell you as a Hindu what it means to be a mature Hindu. I think the conversation we haven't had, and I'm hoping somebody else will pick this up and do some work on it, is formation might actually be, what we're looking for might actually be spiritual maturity. How do we determine what is spiritually mature? Because here's what we do know. To provide spiritual and emotional support at a high level, at a professional level, we need to be spiritually and emotionally mature. I think from a psychological standpoint, we can see what emotional maturity looks like. That's pretty well developed. But what is spiritual maturity? Well, we can say, well, that's religion or faith specific, maybe. There was work done on this before by James Fowler. He wrote a book called Stages of Faith. And there's probably other work similar to that, where we look at what he looked at was faith development, and he tried to articulate a theory, and I thought it was quite good. It's got its limitations. That shows what he called faith development throughout the life cycle, similar to other developmental theories, that shows a trajectory to maturity that's not necessarily specific to the content of one's religion or spiritual practice or philosophy, if you will. So this spiritual maturity piece is language that I'm drawn towards. And I think the question for us is, how do we determine whether you are or you're not? Maybe it's not binary. Maybe it's how spiritually mature are you? And at what point do we need you to be on that trajectory to entrust you with the care of vulnerable people's spiritual lives in healthcare? So I think it's a really big and interesting question, and I hope we get to dig into it more.
Yeah, I would think they need to go beyond stage 3 to at least a stage 4, where they started reflecting on their own religion, on their own self-awareness. So,
Yes.
and that's what is going to bring that maturity, you know. So at
Totally
stage
agree.
4 is a good, I would say, takeoff deck for.
Yeah. When I was studying to become a CPE educator, I really dug into Robert Keegan's developmental theory, and I think he was a colleague with Fowler, and there was this rich school of thought among developmentalists at that time and at that place. And I have the same idea. And as you may know, Keegan does have an evaluation tool to try to be able to stage people, if you will. So maybe that's an area to go. I don't know. It's a big question, and I think it's an interesting one. Yes, Nisha.
Yeah, just a couple of things. It's a very fascinating topic, so thank you very much for that. I'm coming at it from a biomedical science background as a profession. So I'm thinking about, what you said about evidence-based methodology and how that ties up with chaplaincy, and looking at your proposed educational models. One of the things that comes to my mind is, the age of people who are entering the field of chaplaincy. So that isn't happening, at least from the Hindu section. I'm not entirely sure from across the board, but even in my CPE classes, the majority of students are more mature age. So,
Can I just add a piece here? In our data, the median age of early career of these 288 early career chaplains was mid-40s.
Mid-40s.
What other profession do we know of where the median age of the early career is mid-40s? The median age of all healthcare workers in the US is mid-40s. So I'm just adding, you're exactly right. This field does skew older.
So therefore, my point was, in educating people at that stage, they would have gone through a lot of education or professional development in perhaps other fields. And to then embark on another degree at that stage, it's going to be challenging for most. So I think, from the way I look at it, maybe the models need to have some bridging in between, to get those people who are experienced and have the knowledge to pass over, to bridge the gaps.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that there can be one system or one way of education. And the second question I had is, how do you bring the evidence-based part of things into the hospital environment? That is also very challenging, because there's this, it's predominantly Christian based and mostly not evidence-based. That's been my experience for this the last year that I've been working there. So I think it's going to be very challenging to skew that, to change that, or move from the past. So do you have any advice there?
Yeah, well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is about your first point. competency-based education. You and Kelly from Scotland published an article or a chapter, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago about this idea. And the American education system is still largely credit-based. So you have to, it's like you have to demonstrate that you've achieved these 72 or 48 or 24 hours rather than achieve the competency. And you know as well as I do, some of you could do that in 6 months. For others, it might take 4 years. But it's really, if we could focus it on the competencies rather than the time in the seat, as they say. So that's a whole other educational question. And it also gets into pipeline issues. So another study, this is the next study I want to work on. I'm really excited about this. I hope I have the energy to do it after this PhD is complete. I want to find out, how did people learn about the profession of healthcare chaplaincy? My informal poll of people at conferences, my own experience, my mentor George's experience, is that we didn't know it was a field until we got into seminary. We were planning to be congregational ministers, and then they required us to do this weird thing called CPE. We went and did it, and we said, well, this is amazing. There's a whole field. We can make a profession out of this. And so that's really late in the game. That's really late in the game. And so I'm really interested, if we were able to get into health science schools, kind of like VCU, maybe we could get into bachelor's degrees in health sciences and offer an elective or a concentration. It's kind of the same question. How do you learn about respiratory therapy and decide to become a respiratory therapist? I don't know. I mean, there's some data on that, but maybe you encountered one and you said, well, this is kind of interesting. Or maybe you just went to college and somebody was standing at a table at a job fair one day and said, hey, have you ever considered being a respiratory therapist? And then you learn about it. So again, if we contextualize ourselves in the context of other healthcare professionals, then what do they do that can, that we can draw upon to also build out the field a bit? I forgot the second question that you asked.
Oh, no, it wasn't a question. I was just talking about, the evidence-based.
The evidence-based, yeah.
In a traditional setting.
Yeah, what I would say about that is that the evidence base is thin, although it's more robust than ever. There was Koenig from Duke had this slide in 2010 that I saw at a presentation he made, where he said there's been more research between 2000 and 2010 on spirituality and health than there was from 1900 to 2000. And so there's been an explosion in interest in research in spirituality and health, but still, it's very easy in this field to pretty much know all of the major studies and stay on top of it because there's just not that much. And so that is really a sea change, and we're still pretty early in that. The first mention of evidence-based pastoral care in the literature was in 1998. So we're this is kind of a new idea for us as chaplains. So I think we need to build more evidence. That's why I'm doing a PhD. That's why there's a cohort of colleagues who are chaplains who are earning PhDs so that we can, and MPHs, so that we can learn how to do more research. I see some other hands. Lindsay, you've been patiently waiting.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. I just appreciated how you presented everything, and I just want to share just a little bit of context of where I'm coming from. I'm pursuing a master's of theological studies at San Francisco Theological Seminary, and decided not to go for an MDiv. A lot of it was because of my age. I'm in my mid-50s, and chaplaincy became very attractive to me when I started graduate school, just because of the age factor and also the need for women. There are just a lot of men, I think, historically, that have been chaplains, and there is a big need for women. Also, my husband became a nurse in his mid-40s. So, kudos to people getting into these fields at, mid-stage. It's great that we still have it in us and, have opportunities to change careers. I really am grateful for that. But I was really curious about, just the lack of sort of help that chaplains can advocate for themselves. Like, how do you advocate for yourself if you go into a healthcare setting and you really haven't been prepared to do that? How do you prepare yourself to be in a healthcare setting and learn their language and just learn the ropes? And how do you insist on, I need a crash course on how this whole facility runs and Am I
Yes.
being
You
clear about
are.
my question? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing it. I mean, chaplains are fish out of water. That's the thing. You know, again, the majority of my research participants were educated in Christian theological seminaries or divinity schools. That's its own culture.
Right.
And then we go into CPE, typically in a healthcare environment, and we are the fish out of water. And then we're learning we're learning medical terminology, and we're learning acronyms and all these kinds of, the epistemology is completely different. I mean, and you can see it in the way that chaplains interact in interdisciplinary teams. And it's painful sometimes. It's a painful lesson we have to learn. We love stories. We love to tell narratives. When you're in interdisciplinary team rounds, the doctor typically doesn't want to hear a long story. Just get to it. What's the actionable information I need to know? Because we've got 20 people we need to see, and I don't want to be here till 10 o'clock tonight. You know, so just our way of being, our way of communicating, it's the way that we're socialized professionally. And that gets back to that formation piece. So what if we were formed or professionally socialized to be healthcare chaplains, rather than taking this detour of, I'm going to go be a minister, oh, detour, oh, now I'm going to go work in healthcare, and, you know, mostly informally learn that. So it's a struggle. And my hope is that this kind of proposal, degrees that come at it from this bubble over here, the health sciences bubble, might be able to address that. But even seminaries and religious schools could also incorporate one course on the basics of healthcare. That's all you need.
Well,
Or cross-register with, you know, if you're at a university, you can cross-register and take a course outside of your major, so to speak. There are plenty of healthcare courses for others.
Yeah, thank you for suggesting that. And I'm really glad for my program, because a lot of it is interfaith chaplaincy training that I'm involved with. And I really have benefited so much from that discussion. And this last semester, I took a class on making meaning in chaplaincy. And I was the only self-identifying Christian there. So it was just this plethora of all these people with different backgrounds and beliefs. And it was wonderful. I really appreciated that. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Lindsay. Right. Gaurav.
They were a great talk, and this was very illuminating. I have one question and two comments. I'll give the comments in first. One is that our own demographics are that we typically, for the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute, people come in typically 45 to 65, 2/3 are women, 1/3 are men. So it broadly matches the demographic on the age side, and the gender is more skewed toward women in our case, consistently over the years. The other comment I have is that when the way we're teaching now, we're incorporating the practical live conversations into the teaching program itself to allow people to develop the capacity for having these conversations and to hold the space and to not express themselves, but in fact to offer a space for the patients to express themselves fully. So that's the second. The question I have for you is, a lot of the healthcare chaplaincy that you describe, in my experience in talking to hospital administrations, they're more hospital chaplaincies. A lot of the healthcare should extend into the home, should extend to before and after the visit to the hospital. But I find that the broad healthcare is not being covered at all. It's being limited in space, time, and demographic. The space being the hospital, the time being the extreme time when you're sort of in extreme pain, and the demographic is largely Protestant Christian, and that's a very small box within which hospital chaplaincy seems to be operating. Whereas the broad spectrum of healthcare and the broad spectrum of demographics that are now out there, they're not being addressed. So that's just a question for you. Do you see that changing?
Yes, I do. There are currently two models. Again, it's a Venn diagram, two models of chaplaincy. There's an older model that is religiously focused or denominationally focused. I'm the Catholic chaplain, I'm the Jewish chaplain. The other circle and the more predominant model, I believe and hope, is the unit-based chaplain or disease-specific chaplain. So I'm the cardiology chaplain, I'm the trauma chaplain, I'm the oncology chaplain. That's the model that I've been formed and shaped in. And it's a model that I believe is more inclusive in the sense that in New York City, where I've practiced for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, you know, we're a very diverse place. And so if you're in the cardiology, if you're in the heart hospital at Mount Sinai, for example, you're going to have a very diverse group of people. You may have a Protestant. So I don't even like to use the term, actually. I don't even like to be referred to as a Protestant chaplain, because I choose and prefer and teach, de-emphasize your religious identity in this role. Emphasize that you are part of the interprofessional team in oncology, and you're here to address the spiritual and emotional needs of patients, their loved ones, and that if there is a specific religious need, we have those resources. We will reach out and make a referral. It's really it's like a generalist specialist sort of model. You know, the way that we've talked about that in chaplaincy is all healthcare professionals can be generalists in spiritual care. They can identify a spiritual need and make a referral to the specialist. If you drill down even more, all healthcare chaplains can be generalist chaplains, religiously speaking, address the universal sort of existential issues, which basically is counseling, if you will, you know, spiritually integrated counseling. And when specific religious needs come up, I'm an Episcopal priest. If you're an Episcopalian and you want to confess your sins, I'm your guy. I'm right here. I'll put my collar on. We'll do it. But if you're a Hindu and you have a specific need, I'm not your guy, but I know somebody. I'm going to get somebody for you. And I'm going to make sure that you get that connection so that you get that need met. And that's the model that I prefer and I think is actually more economically viable. You know, the more generalist kind of thing. But Zachary,
And what about the non-hospital situations, the pre and post hospital?
Oh, yeah, that's a harder nut to crack. There are more outpatient chaplains that are coming on board, and it's not because we don't want to be. It's the I think it gets back to the economics, which gets back to the evidence base. So how do you convince healthcare systems to put some money towards spiritual care? Well, you need an evidence base. You need to say, well, this is going to be effective in these key outcome measures that you care about as the CEO or the administrative, you know, the executives. And, you know, if we can show that we can help improve people's health and reduce readmissions and all of that sort of thing, maybe reducing loneliness, you know, which may drive readmissions in some, you know, that sort of thing, then we're a value add to the system. And, you know, maybe we're able to be more involved in the spectrum of healthcare. Is that great?
Makes me also think of community chaplaincy, community chaplains, and how that could be braided into the work.
Yeah. If I can just add one thing, Malcolm Marlar is a wonderful friend and colleague at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, UAB. That's where I did my CPE residency. And he established as an outpatient chaplain for an HIV/AIDS clinic in Birmingham. He established something called the Support Team Network. You can Google that, supportteam.org or Support Team Network UAB. And basically what he did was he realized as one chaplain, he can only do so much. But if he could help to train a support team to gather around people at home to provide spiritual, emotional, and practical support, he could make a huge impact in their lives. And I believe that program is. It's something as simple as I'm in too much pain or I'm too depressed today to get to the pharmacy to get my medication. Yeah, all right, let's call a support team. I can swing by the pharmacy, pick it up on my way home and come over and we can visit for a minute. You know, it's like, whoa, like, you know, just something simple like that. He's already developed a whole curriculum to train people. I highly recommend it. I think it was way before its time. And it's the kind of thing, you know, getting into the community, people who are post-discharge, that sort of thing.
Thank you, David. We're going to have to wrap up pretty quickly here. I did have one burning question, though. On your chart where you showed sequential practicum versus an integrated practicum, is there a pedagogical or andragogical reason for why there would be a necessity for sequential practicum after core academics versus an integrated model? I come from a social work and psychology background where the practicum model, it not only helps create and cultivate that form of professional identity, but it also helps people to say, oh, this isn't really for me, or I really love this aspect of the
Earlier.
work, and I'm going to focus more on a particular area. So I was curious if you uncovered any particulars of why it's been that way for so long as a sequential.
Well, I have some ideas about that. One is in traditional seminary education, you do have some integrated clinical educations called field ed, but again, it's typically in congregational settings. And you do have typically a summer unit of CPE, which is where many of us found healthcare chaplaincy. And then you go into the residency. But really, I think it's an economic issue. We get Medicare pass-through funding for these residencies in hospitals to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Which supports departments, CPE educators, all sorts of things. So I really think the economics drive it in chaplaincy. I don't know the andragogical reasons in med ed. In physical therapy, where I found the integrated clinical education model, their educational rationale is you've got less gap in time between learning the theory and attempting to put it into practice, and that's better for learning. So I think from a pedagogical, andragogical point of view, at face value, it just seems like a better idea.
David, thank you so much for your time. We're a little past the hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and your time today. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your findings. We can't wait to see what you publish next and future research and how this begins to transform the field of chaplaincy in healthcare.
Thank you. It's been a real joy to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David G.